Modern technology has made this the best time ever to be alive. However, has this technology come at a cost? I sit down with Michael Easter, who is the author of The Comfort Crisis, and we discuss how so many different comforts and technology that is available to us right now may actually be coming at a cost to our overall happiness. This is the No Excuse to Miss podcast. Welcome to the No Excuse to Miss podcast. I am your host, Scott Volkwartson. I am thrilled to get this week's guest on the show. He's an author, speaker, professor, and an explorer. His work has appeared in over 60 countries, been endorsed by directors of the CIA, the Navy SEALs, gold medal winning Olympians, leading physicians, Pulitzer Prize winning authors, Buddhists, environmental leaders, and more. I was first introduced to him through his phenomenal book that has changed how I look at life, The Comfort Crisis. It's a privilege to welcome to the show, Michael Easter. How you doing, Michael?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the sweet intro.
Thanks for coming on. So I'm not just saying this because you're on the show, but this is one of those books that I've already gifted to multiple people.
That's awesome. I love that.
Just because as I read through it, there's like so many things that hit me like right in the middle of the face, or I'm just like, oh, wow, that's me, or this is me.
Yeah.
So before we dive into the book, can you just give us a little background on you?
Yeah, sure. So my background is basically I worked for Men's Health magazine for a bunch of years, like 7 years. And I got there by way of I had in undergrad been really interested in science, but also writing. So I ended up going to grad school for a program that focused on like health and environmental and science journalism because I love to write. I was also kind of a dork with science, but I've also been kind of, an adventurer, outdoorsy type person. And I ended up working at a couple men's magazines and a couple science magazines, and a job opened up at Men's Health. And that's basically what that magazine is, right? It's like a magazine for dudes that has a lot of health science in it. So I worked there for a lot of years, and it was a cool gig. I kind of, made my name, I guess I would say, finding interesting people in interesting places doing something interesting. Anytime I could get out of the office and go somewhere cool, do something cool on a story, like I was in. So that kind of started me on this trajectory of doing this kind of writing where I guess I embed myself in a certain place and go experience things and then just kind of translate, I think, what it means for people. And, I think early on in my career, they had me covering like fitness and some nutrition, but I'm much more interested in like, what are all the things that really impact human health, human performance, the human experience. So I kind of tend to take like a big lens and look at things with a 30,000 foot view. A few years ago, I left Men's Health officially from being, on staff in the office. And now I'm what's called a contributing editor, which really is just means that when they have a story idea, they just call me up and say, do you want to write this? Like, it's totally informal, but sounds more important than it is. And I'm a professor at the University of Nevada, Las Vegas. So I teach in the journalism department. And I've continued to write a lot. The other half, besides teaching of my job, is continuing to write and do journalism. And my book that you mentioned that I'm really glad you enjoyed came out in May. So, yeah.
Well, yeah, the book was so good. And I think one of the aspects that I liked about it is probably what you just described there was there was so much science behind it, but yet then your storytelling is unbelievable. So like there was all the scientific facts to back it up, but then presented in a way that was super easy to follow.
Yeah.
And one of the things that stuck out to me is you talk in the book about how you battled alcohol issues when you were younger and then just woke up one day after, I think if I remember correctly, after a bender or maybe a 2-day bender and said, I got to do something else.
Right.
How do you go from there to flying into the Alaskan backcountry with guys like Donnie Vincent?
Yeah.
How do you make that leap? I mean, it's not like you just went on a hunt in Utah or
totally.
somewhere like that, you went to the extreme and then some.
Right. Well, yeah. So here's the thing is like, I went to the extremes of my drinking too. So maybe that says something about me that, I'm a person who likes to live on the extremes. But for me, I think, when I look back on my drinking, it's like I drank because it made me more comfortable. Um, Drinking is easier than not drinking. If you were in a social situation, drinking makes that easier. You want to let off some steam? Nothing easier than drinking, right? So it solved a lot of my problems, but I come from this long line of family members who were just hell on wheels when they drank. And I definitely had that gear and that gene, and I could see that, to a certain extent, like when I first started drinking, alcohol probably improved my life, and that it made me easier to talk to at parties and it did all this other thing. But at a certain point, that starts to backfire, right? And alcohol started to cause all my problems. And I was the type of drinker that just from day one, like my favorite drink was always the next drink. I'm like, it's not like I drank every day, but it's like if I'm drinking on a weekend, we're going to need a lot of alcohol because I'm trying to get to a certain point. It was totally compulsive. It's like, and when you drink like that, bad things happen. And I tried to quit a lot of times because I could just see that, there's the saying that like people who drink like I did, it's like you end up in jail, hospitals, or sanitariums or funeral homes. I hit 2 of the 4, and that was by the time I was 28. And, one morning for whatever reason, I just woke up and I'd had a lot of mornings like this before where I'd been on a bender and just life was falling apart. I think the interesting thing is that, on paper, my life looked fine, but just internally and like everything around me, I could see that this habit was probably going to end me early. I didn't know if I was going to die at, like I read in the book, like 35, 55, or 75. I didn't know. I just knew it was going to end me early. And I had this like very strange realization where finally for the first time I could see that. And I also felt like I could see these kind of 2 paths. And it was like, I can keep drinking. It's going to be easier. It's going to be more comfortable, but your life is slowly going to unravel. It's going to kill you early. But that's familiar. That's easy, right? Or I could take this other path where, I sober up, and I knew that was going to be hard because I'd have to basically relearn life and how to live it more or less, because so much of my life revolves around just kind of waiting out my time until the next weekend when I could go on another bender. And I could kind of see like an opportunity there. So I took the path that I knew was going to be challenging and uncomfortable. And it was like getting sober is super hard. You have to totally so much of your behavior has to shift. And you have to peel that onion and be like, well, why was I drinking that way in the first place? You have to reach out for help and ask people questions, right? So anyways, I do that. And from there, I could see that, like, I think for the first time, I think this is something a lot of people know, but, I'm the type of person, I have to go through experiences to really understand things. And I could see that, like, doing things that are hard and challenging that we don't want to do is often what improves our life. And my life improved across the board. So fast forward like 3-4 years. I'm still writing for Men's Health. I've moved out to Las Vegas.
That's probably not the easiest city to, quit drinking in either.
No. Yeah, I was pretty firm when I had a pretty good base before moving out here. But yeah, I used to come down here with all my buddies once a year and just like absolutely raise hell, But I end up doing this story where I go on an elk hunt in Nevada with Donnie Vincent. And it wasn't that big of a deal. It was like 5 nights. But even that, just getting out, being totally off the grid, we hiked in. It was like a true backpack hunt. And it sort of introduced me to these new forms of discomfort that I just hadn't faced, a long time. Like it was freezing cold the entire time. Really hungry because you have to pack in food. Getting water meant we had to hike down the mountain, We're glassing for elk most of the day, which is so boring so unbelievably boring, and my phone doesn't work, right? Um, but I got back from that, and I just felt like it felt a lot better. And I could also see that, that is, even though we're using expensive outdoor equipment and, really sweet technical bows, that's a lot closer to how humans lived for like all of time.
Yeah.
And it made me realize that, oh man, like modern life today is so comfortable in every way. Like we've engineered our environments to be as comfortable as possible. And this goes from um, our living like quarters, air conditioned, temperature controlled, like couches everywhere. We sit all day, to the type of work we do, where a lot of it now is mental rather than physical, intellectual work, to the fact that we have so many ways to distract ourselves, to our food system, just every single way. And then Donnie and I hit it off basically. And he invited me to come up to the Arctic for, more than a month. And, for me, it was like, well, man, if I felt that good after Nevada, like this is going to be pretty challenging and tough, but like maybe there's something that like maybe I could learn and understand this deeper. Almost like going through sobriety, right? It's like,
Yeah.
it's like, oh, well, that looks like it's going to be awful in a lot of ways, but who knows what lies beyond that door. Yeah, so I went up there with him, and it just really reinforced a lot of those observations I'd made about sort of trying to reinvent the sort of lifestyle that humans used to live, and like really putting yourself into these different forms of discomfort that humans used to face every single day. And I think that's a message that sometimes gets misconstrued about the book, is like, I'm not saying make everything uncomfortable, because, I like to say a boxer doesn't get good at boxing by being punched in the face. That is not their goal. But being punched in the face is part of becoming a better boxer, right? So it's like,
Yeah.
we're trying to do these things, and along the way, there's going to be hardships. But on the other end of that, you come out better. So that's kind of a long answer, but I hope I answered your question.
Yeah. And one of the things that stuck out to me on that was, like, if I'm just looking at it for me personally, that'd be something that I'd be like, oh yeah, I'm in. And then I would spend whatever time leading up to that convincing myself why I didn't have time to go.
Yeah.
I'd be like, oh, I have a wife and kids and a
Right.
job, all these things, until I was convinced there's no way I could take more than a month out of my schedule and go do it.
Right.
But then, like, the way you describe it in there, and, everything from the mental side of it to the physical aspect of it, had me drawn in. And I'm like, I found it unique that you said yes to that, taking that leap of faith. Was there any hesitation or questioning yourself after you did that?
Yeah. So Donnie invites me up there, and like the way he does this is the guy's a hell of a salesman. He's like, look, we're going to go up there and we're going to fly in. You're going to be like, this can't be real. There's just land everywhere. There's like, you're going to see, grizzly bears. I mean, he's selling it like it's this, like I'm picturing myself as like this hero in this outdoor adventure epic. And I'm like, oh man, this sounds pretty rad, So I'm like, okay, let's do it. And then afterwards, he's like, okay, this is going to be a lot more dangerous than what we did in Nevada, right? And I go, yeah, I assume so. Like, how much more dangerous? And he goes, 20 times. And I go, 20 times? Yeah, I can do that. That's fine. And he goes, well, I don't know. Maybe it's 50. Maybe it's 70. Maybe it's 90 times more. And then after that, it was like, oh, yeah, this is going to be a situation up there. So, I mean, but I felt like I'd signed on, and I think because of, to your point, 2 points. One is that the human brain is designed to want to do the next most comfortable thing, because as we evolved as humans, that's what kept us alive. We don't want to be too cold. We don't want to be too hot, right? Because that's dangerous. That could be dangerous for us. We want to avoid any and all risk, right? So this is like still today why we don't want to take risks in business, or we don't want to speak in front of a crowd, or all these kind of things. This is why we tend to overeat, because in our past, it's like if you had access to really calorie dense food like we do now, it made a lot of sense to pound as much of it as possible and gain weight because you were inevitably going to face a lean time, right? But today the world has become so comfortable that this drive we have to always do the easy things, to talk ourselves into an easy thing, to, if we've decided to do something hard, to sort of tell ourselves all the reasons why we shouldn't be doing that. I think that really backfires in so many ways, that I talk about the book. So I mean, which is kind of a long way to say, my brain did the exact same thing yours did. I'm like, well, maybe I don't have, maybe, but I'm looking at all these ways to get out, but it was kind of one of those that after getting sober, I'm like, no, man, like you've said yes to this. Let's go out there. We'll see what happens. Yes, it's going to be dangerous, but we're going to do everything we can to get ourselves as prepared for this as reasonably possible. So I had to kind of overhaul. Once I signed on, it was like I had to really overhaul how I was living in a lot of ways. I had to change my physical training. If I'm trying to like bulk up, that doesn't make a lot of sense when you're carrying weight already and walking 10 miles a day. It's just extra weight you're going to carry. I had to learn all this new stuff that like I had never needed to know, like things like land patterns and how to read the weather and stuff about the animal, the caribou we were hunting, just all this stuff, right? But what was interesting, and what I talk about in the book, is that the human brain also defaults to routine, to doing the same thing sort of day in and day out, And this used to make a lot of sense in our past because your brain wants to do what it can predict. This used to basically be like, if we knew where food was, we'd want to keep going back to that. So we like to slip into a routine. But in today's day and age where like we pretty much know what's coming at us next, it just kind of causes you to tune out of life and you're just kind of lost in your own head. So by doing sort of taking on new challenges and doing new things, even in the preparation, when you have to like do all this new stuff, it puts you back in the present. And it sort of gives you this like new sense of purpose that makes you, I think, just more aware of your daily behaviors. So that's kind of a side benefit to it.
Well, and that was even something like, as I read through the book, little things that I picked up on, just like in my daily life of, you talk about like how our ancestors were always on the move so much more than we are.
Yeah.
Now we consider our 45 minutes in the gym. Well, we got our workout in for the day. Now we can go sit for the rest of the day.
Right.
So even like, as I read that, I've been personally been trying to get more movement in throughout the day. Mm-hmm. I even posted about this where I go on a walk every night and I would bring my phone. I'd listen to a podcast. I'd listen to whatever. And after I read the book, I stopped doing that. I just go walk and I have no electronic distractions with me.
Yeah.
And it's almost embarrassing how many times I reach for my phone.
Yeah.
To see like, oh, I wonder what happened on Instagram while I'm out here. I wonder who emailed me.
Yeah.
So like you said earlier, it didn't require me to go, to the backcountry, but I still pick up on a lot of little things where I become so routine oriented that I don't even challenge myself throughout the day.
Right. Totally.
I don't want you to obviously give away the entire book because I want people to read it. But, you talk in there about like the true meaning of hunger.
Mm-hmm.
How what we think is hunger on a normal day is not really hunger. You talk in the book about having to start rationing out your food, trying to divide out how much food you had left for X amount of days.
Right. Yeah. So like, there's only so much food you can carry. And so we had kind of allotted, I think, between like 1,800 and 2,000 calories a day, but we're walking everywhere. To kind of your point about movement, it's like the world out there, it forces you to always kind of be on the move. If we want water, it's like you got to hike down to a creek and then you got to carry these like heavy water bags back up to camp. Got to set up tents. You got to get from point A to point B requires, walking across the tundra, which is awful to walk on. And so we're burning like easy 4,000 calories a day. I mean, even the fact that it is so cold, our body's having to burn through more energy to keep our core temperature stable. And so, you start getting in the hole in terms of food. So we'd have to start rationing. So like, I remember just counting protein bars and being like, crap, like I can't eat 2 a day anymore. We're going to have to go down to 1. And it's really fascinating because as the body starts to lose weight, humans have all these amazing mechanisms that put us in survival mode when we start to lose weight. So, for example, things like your body's core temperature will cool down a bit because it doesn't use as much fuel if you're at a lower temperature. Our heart rates will slow down. All these other things that lower our metabolism. We will naturally begin to try to conserve movement. So if you're the type of person who fidgets all the time, well, if you find yourself in a calorie hole, your brain naturally will have you just fidget less, and you're not even aware of it. We also start to like obsess about food. Like your brain starts to fixate on food because, all these things in our past used to provide a survival benefit. Because if you're obsessing about food, you're more likely to go out and find food, right? If you can slow down your metabolism, you're going to last on your fat stores longer. And what was interesting for me is like all of a sudden I am like truly hungry. Because when you look at a lot of the research, I think 80% of eating today is driven by reasons other than real hunger. It's like we eat because it's breakfast time or lunch time or dinner time because it's a time. We eat because we're stressed, right? It's like, just like for me, in my past, like drinking killed stress pretty easy. Like, oh, well, there goes my problems after the first drink, right? I think food does that for a lot of people today. Or we eat because we're bored or whatever. And so, there's all these diets out there and they all kind of like pin the blame on like one thing. It's like, oh, it's sugar, or it's like wheat, or it's, take the Mediterranean diet. It's foods that are not from the Mediterranean. Every single diet will work if you follow it, which is why you see people who have had success. Like you go on Instagram, it's like, well, here's this vegan bodybuilder who looks ripped. Here's this carnivore bodybuilder who looks ripped. Here's this like macro counting bodybuilder that looks ripped. Like everything works. But the thing is that because of those mechanisms we have that make us hungrier when we start to lose weight, that have us obsessed about food, that slow down our metabolism, what happens is that most people last about 5 weeks on a diet and then they bail. And why is that? It's because diet, like trying to lose weight, inevitably means that you are going to be hungry, and people can't withstand the discomfort of hunger. So like when I'm in Alaska, I'm like, oh man, like this is fascinating to actually like have to marinate in hunger and feel what it actually like feels like for once, and it wasn't fun, but at the same time, by going through that, I'm like, yeah, I ended up losing like 10 pounds. But now I know if there's ever a point in my life where I'm like, oh, I need to lose weight, like it's going to be easier for me because I learned, like in the modern world, we think hunger is an emergency, right? Yes. It's like, oh my God, I'm hungry. What if I don't have dinner? It's like, well, humans used to go like 24 hours without food because a hunt went south. Like you're going to be fine, Yeah. But we don't realize that.
Yeah, that part stuck out to me. And then, you mentioned earlier that you like to immerse yourself in your research and go on all these adventures in different areas to really fully understand. Something that I found interesting in the book was that you traveled to Bhutan. Am I even saying that correctly?
Yeah, you are.
I think you said in the book there's something like the 139th most developed country.
Yeah.
But one of the happiest cultures on earth.
Yeah.
And when you went over there, you talked, one of the fascinating things is how much they reflect on like death compared to what we do over here.
Yeah.
You mentioned that they reflect, I think it's 3 times a day that they actively talk or think on it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Where over here, I think you said that even most people over the age of 65 try not to even think about it or talk about it or envision their own.
Yeah.
So once again, for me personally, I started using that as trying to do that on my own.
Mm-hmm.
And at first, it's a very uncomfortable thing to even think about.
Totally.
You want your mind to wander. You're like, okay, I'm going to go flip the TV on or do whatever. I got to get out of this headspace.
Totally.
But then after I went back and reread some of those chapters that you had on there, and they talked about, after you reflect on that for the day, you look at things completely different of what really is going to set you off or drive you crazy.
Right. Yeah.
So once again, it was one of those turning points that has completely changed my perspective on trying to go through my days. What did you find like being immersed in that culture, and how long were you over there?
I was over there for about a week. So, I think I had never hunted before. I'd been on hunts, but I'd never actually killed anything. And so by going up into the Arctic and hunting a caribou, like I had this realization that like, oh, this is just like part of the life cycle, right? Because I didn't really want to hunt at first because I didn't want to like cross this emotional, what I presumed would be a pretty heavy emotional barrier. But I did, and it was like as we broke that caribou down and I could see that it's meat, it was like, oh, for one thing to live on, another has to die. Like you can see that and experience that through hunting, at least for me. And so, but then it occurs to me like, oh, you are not excluded from that cycle, right? So this got me thinking about like death and how we in America think about it. And I think that, you brought up the stat that I had in the book that I think it's not even half of people who are over 65 have thought about their death and how they want to die. You think about our food system, meat just kind of magically appears and it is presented in such a way that you don't really get a cue that it was from a living creature, right? It's kind of in the styrofoam thing. And even our funeral system, when someone dies, we make them look as alive as possible for a viewing. And then it's like after the funeral, we're told to keep your mind off it. Don't think about it. Sorry for the siren. I'm in downtown Las Vegas at UNLV.
It happens.
Yeah. Speaking of death, someone's been shot. But it just made me like wonder what has our sort of modern removal from death done to us. And, in doing research, I learned that in Bhutan, people are instructed to think about death, and death is really part of the culture and part of being alive. And so they have things like a lot of their cultural celebrations focus around death. Funerals are a lot different there. There's even like these, when someone dies, they're cremated and their ashes are mixed with clay and formed into these little pyramids. And these little pyramids are placed all throughout the country. Like every road turn you see, like window seals, they're just everywhere. And so I went there to sort of understand what that's done for them, because the point you brought up that they're not developed comparatively, they're very underdeveloped, yet they're so happy. And it's like, I think in the West, our whole reason for constantly pushing economic development is because we think as you make more money and have more stuff, you become happier. Right? But that doesn't seem to be the case. There's definitely a point where you hit enough, and then having more is not going to actually make you any happier. So I go there and I talk to them about how this idea of thinking about death plays into happiness. And I visited like 3 different people, but one that I visited was this guy who's a Buddhist monk who lives in this shack that's kind of in the shadow of this monastery up on the cliff. And so to get up there, it's like I'm in the smart car with a driver and we have to like 4x4 Baja this thing, this mountain road. And I walk in there and it's like a cliche scene. It's like the gangly Western writer comes to see the guru. I mean, this guy's like, meditating in his orange robes in the lotus positions, shaved head, and like there's incense smoke in the room. It was just wild. But I talked to him for, a few hours, and he just talked about how people tend to get hung up and think they're going to be happy by accomplishing the next thing or owning the next thing. So, if you think about how the American dream has been framed, it's like, I'm going to graduate high school, then I'm going to go to college, then I'm going to get married, then I'm going to buy a house, then I'm going to get a nice car, then I'm going to get a vacation home somewhere. And there's like this list of stuff. And we think that by checking off the next thing on this list, that's what's going to make us happy. But what ends up happening is that you just start to focus on the next thing. right? So you're like, oh, I'll be happy when I ... Like we're always in that mode. But in Bhutan, they, by thinking about their death, they realize that like a lot of the stuff that we obsess over is not going to really matter in the end. It's like people are like, oh, I'm going to be happy when I get that Rolex because that'll make me look a certain way. It's like, that doesn't matter. You poll people at the end of their life, and what really matters to them was like their time with their family, that they did something meaningful. And like, if you're just doing those things now, making sure you're paying attention to those things, you don't have to worry about checking off that box and you become happy. And what happens is that when people think about their death, it changes your behavior. Because to the point that you made, if you go through this discomfort of like, and it is uncomfortable, think about how you're going to die, and it's like, well, that was crazy. But it also focuses your energy, because if you were like, you realize that this ride is going to end, all of a sudden, maybe you're not going to get as worked up about like some email that you perceived as being passive aggressive, or like someone cut you off in traffic or whatever. Because it's just like, why am I going to waste this limited time I have right now focusing on this, frankly, what is nonsense, like stuff that's not going to matter in like 10 minutes, So it colors like your everyday. If you can bring that into your thoughts every day, it kind of just changes your behavior for the positive. And, it sounds a little bit woo-woo, but at the same time, there's research that's been conducted in the US that has found that they have groups think about, whatever, and other groups think about their death, and then they poll them over time, and they find that people who think about their death tend to be happier.
Which is ironic or interesting at the same time, because you would think that it would bring people down.
Yeah.
But as I read that research that you put in the book, it allows you, it's almost like a freeing thing that you can start to live your life, not so worried about what other people think about you.
Yeah.
Not worried about what watch you have, car you drive, whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And the interesting thing is, you keep like you said, you keep going after that next nugget or next material thing that you need.
Mm-hmm.
And you end up working so much. And I've been guilty of this. So
we all have,
that you don't even get time to go enjoy it with your family.
Right.
Because you're on to the next thing.
Yeah.
So now you may have this vacation home or this, whatever insert object A, but you can't go enjoy it with your family because you're back to work, back to the quote unquote grind.
Right.
To be able to get that next thing because somebody else has something bigger or better than you.
Yeah. And it's like, what is the purpose of the grind? The purpose of the grind is not to grind. The purpose of the grind is to have some outcome that is opposite of grinding. Right. So I think that what happens is, and there's like all these like really interesting Zen koans that get into this idea, but like we often just do things because that is what society does. And we don't stop and be like, well, wait, what is this? Why am I doing this? Yeah. Like, why am I working 80 hours a week? Do I wait, what is the purpose of my job? Right. It's not to do your job. It's to whatever. So I don't know. I think we don't stop to think that, but when we sort of insert this idea of like, oh, I'm going to die, and holy shit, that's a wake up. But then it kind of helps us see some of those things that we haven't seen.
So, like I said, I had so many little takeaways going through that book that I've reread certain chapters. Of all the experiences that you had that you highlight in the book, is there one like single biggest takeaway that you had for yourself?
I think for me, it was basically how good we have it in modern life, especially if you're living in a developed country. I tell this story about how when I have to get up to the Arctic, it's like 6 flights, so you go from like a really big 747 into successively smaller planes to get out into the middle of the tundra, where it's the last plane you're in like a pack of gum that has wings, But like on that first flight from Las Vegas to Seattle, it's like I'm in this big 747, and like I hate flying because flying is awful, right? There's not enough room. The seats are cramped. The coffee sucks. The plane is too hot. If you have to go to the bathroom, it's like too cramped. If they're showing movies, the movies are always awful. It's just the worst. Well, then I spend a month in the Arctic where it's like literally everything takes effort. Like We don't even have coffee some days because it runs out. It is freezing cold the entire time. Getting any water everything takes effort, right? We don't get, I don't sit on anything but the ground for a month. And then, so when I go back and take that flight from Seattle back to Vegas, it's like, how do you think my experience of that flight, what do you think it was like? I'm like, holy hell, this is the most amazing thing ever. It's like the seat, like I'm actually sitting in a chair. I haven't sat in a chair for a month. That's really comfortable. They have coffee. It's warm.
Even in the book, when you talk about your first shower,
yeah,
when you got back to civilization, for lack of a better word,
yes,
you talk about that first shower and, just even like the comfort or the, everything you went through, just going through that after not being able to do that for over a month.
Yeah. So the point is that, like, you come to appreciate all this amazing stuff we have in our life and take for granted so much more. Like, you can finally, like, maybe there's people out there who are just like, no, I totally can see that all of this is amazing and, like, I'm very grateful for it. But for me, like, I needed to go out there and experience something that was, challenging in order to really see that. And then when I got back, it's like, why would I ever complain ever? Like, it's amazing point in time to be alive, right? And I think we miss that. And I'm not at all suggesting that someone has to do a month in the Arctic. I even think that, like, when people go, you go on like a really, I don't know, let's say you were going to do like some overnight camping thing where you hike into a location. Like, I think most people can do that. But even after that, like, once you come back and take that shower and have that first meal that isn't like, some power bar, you're like, oh, this is awesome. And you appreciate it so much more. And so I think that basically we just need more of doing challenging things that remind us that we do have it really good. And it's so nice that we don't have to do those things. Right? We don't have to do those things to live anymore. But by doing them, we get something from them, and it improves our modern, comfortable, amazing life and helps us understand how amazing and comfortable it is.
And I think the interesting thing about what you did, and you talk about it a little bit in the book, is there was no option B for you to get out once you were there. It's not like if somebody goes and runs a marathon and at mile 20, you're like, I'm tired. Yes. You can just step off to the side, and so many times when we challenge ourselves, there's always an easy out.
Yeah.
So I kept going back to that as I was reading through that book, is you are pot committed for that entire duration out there with, no cell service outside of, I think you had an emergency satellite phone, but there was no, hey, I think I'm out, guys. I'm going to,
I'm going to go home. I'm going
to catch the next red eye back to Vegas and
exactly
call it good.
Yeah, I think your point about marathons is a good one. It's like when people decide they're going to do a marathon today, they don't go, I'm not sure if I can finish this marathon. They go, I'm not sure if I can finish this marathon in insert goal time. They know they're going to finish. They're just trying to hit some arbitrary time standard, right? So we don't really do things that put us in a position to fail anymore. So even when we do insert challenges into our life, we're picking things that, sure, they might not be easy, but we know we're going to accomplish them, right? So one of the arguments I make in the book is that we need to start doing things that we have a real chance of failing at. Do it in a safe, controlled environment, of course, but like there's this idea of misogi I talk about, and it's the idea that once a year I'm going to go out and I'm going to do something really freaking hard that's creative, that's in nature, and I'm just going to make it up. And I don't need to advertise it and make it a big deal and brag about it and all that kind of stuff, but I'm just going to choose something. And the only rule is that I have to have a true 50-50 shot of finishing it. And then the second rule is don't die. So don't do something stupid and, like, obviously take precautions. But the idea that, when you go out and you do something that you really aren't sure if you can do, truly are unsure, something happens where you think you're going to have to quit. You're like, I'm going to quit soon, right? But if you keep going, then you can get past that point that you thought was your edge, your limit, and then you can look back on that and be like, oh, well, I thought my limit was back there, but here I am still moving forward, still progressing. It's like if I've sold myself short in something as simple as this, like where else in my life am I selling myself short? And then all of a sudden you realize that like we often misjudge ourselves, our ability to perform, our ability to do things, because your brain is always going to want to keep you in a safety net of not doing anything too crazy, because that would have kept you alive in the past. But now that the world is so comfortable and safe and easy, it's like it just makes you undervalue what you're capable of. And that holds you back in life in all domains. I mean, business, relationships, friendships, if you're a spiritual person, like where that can take you financially. I mean, all kinds of things.
And I think you're right. It's that worried about failing or worried. And I've even read it from other people that have said, it's not even so much failure sometimes, it's what we think other people will think of us when we fail.
Right.
Which, to your point earlier, when we're on our deathbed, do we care what that person thought of us, that we failed at this business venture, but we made it in this one or whatever it might be?
Yeah.
But it occupies, at least for me, I know it'll occupy my mind and I worry about it way too much.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right.
I mean, we don't want to fail. We're worried what other people are going to think about us. And in our past, that probably made sense. Today, it just oversteps those boundaries. Like, it matters probably, but like to such a small degree, that we just like give it oversized value. And like, frankly, if we're all sitting here going like, I wonder what that person's going to think of me. I wonder what that person's going to think of me. Do we think that we are unique in worrying about what others are going to think about us? No, everyone else is too damn busy worried about themselves and what you think of them that they're not even going to, it's not even going to matter, So I don't know.
Yeah. Well, like I said, I thoroughly enjoyed the book and I highly recommend that people pick it up because, like I said earlier, the storytelling along with the scientific research that you put into it, I kept giving, I'm like, you guys got to read this. You guys have to read this. So what do you have? I think I read in your newsletter, your email newsletter, that you have a new book that you're working on.
Yeah, I just started working on a new book and it's sort of a follow-up to this one, but kind of at a bigger scale of, another thing that humans evolved to do is always want more food, more information, more influence in their communities, more stuff, to always try and get like more happiness. But this made sense because we evolved in environments of scarcity of all those things. And now all those things are abundant. I mean, you think of things from like the fact, like how many people can you influence with now social media? But it turns out that like always obeying this drive for more is not actually serve us in the long run. So
like you brought up information, how much over information now prevents us from actually going out and doing it?
Yeah.
Because it's way too easy to say, well, I'm just going to read one more article.
Yeah.
I got to read this book or I got to see what this person says before I actually go put in the work. So
yes,
it'd be like you having to go talk to 30 different hunters to decide what you wanted to do.
Right.
You would eventually go, it's too complicated. I'm done.
Yeah. Paralysis by analysis.
Yes. Instead, you just chose Donnie and went with it. And I think that's awesome.
Yeah, exactly. And even something like, how many experts are there now? Like there's an expert for everything. And like, we can't make a decision without consulting some expert that like, where the hell did they get that information? Right. Yeah. I saw an article in the New York Times the other day that was, should you take your shoes off before walking into the house? And they'd consulted experts on this. It's like, we need an expert to tell us whether or not to take our shoes off before going in the house. Like, what are we talking about here?
And like you talk in the book, is it the Hazda?
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it was them that you talked about how much, I hate to use the word, but how much dirtier they live than us.
Right.
But yet how much less disease and, outside of communicable diseases, how much healthier they can be in certain aspects.
Yeah.
Which I found interesting. But like you said, we have a study to show everything and everybody's an expert.
Right. Right. Well, yeah. And they're interesting because it's not, it's the type of, it's how are they getting dirty? They're not like, in the New York City subway licking licking the handle. They're like outside and getting dirty in the sense of interacting with microorganisms that exist naturally in the natural world. And so it tends to really help their gut bacteria and help with a lot of, like, they don't get really any of the digestive issues that Westerners get, like colon cancer or IBD or all that kind of stuff. So it's pretty fascinating. I think it makes a case that, like, that's why it's good to get outside sometimes and, like, you know, sit in the dirt, hang out, do whatever. Like, it's going to be good for you, you know?
Well, that's what I've even started to enjoy my walks more, just listening to, and, you know, it might just be walking around a golf course, whatever it is, but just being outside, listening to what's going on around me versus constantly having an audiobook or a podcast.
Yeah.
I would listen to them and I'd almost be stressed out by the time I got back home. Cause I'm like, I got to do this now. I got to do this. This person said this. Holy shit. Why did I go for a walk? I don't have time for that.
Yeah. Our brains never get a break. And part of this is one of the reasons why in my book, I argue that we need to reinsert boredom into our life. So boredom is this evolutionary discomfort that used to basically tell us to do something, and that something would be productive. But it also gave our brain a break. It's like nowadays, people have so many easy escapes from boredom. We didn't have those in our past, right? So now it's like, if like you look at people on a line at a grocery store, people can't just stand there. It's like you pull out your phone and, like, everyone pulls out their phone reflexively anytime you feel a twinge of boredom. But that just causes your brain to keep working and working. And that stress from all that work accumulates over time. So we need these periods where we sort of get bored once in a while. And, like, I do 20 minutes a day on a walk every day. And I think it's really good for me, to be honest.
I would completely agree. And to your point about, like, standing in the line at the grocery store, not only are you constantly on your phone, but nobody's having real conversations with anybody anymore.
No.
You know, where 20 years ago, you would turn to the person behind you and talk to them.
Yeah.
Like humans should.
Yes, exactly.
Now, I mean, we hop in an elevator. The first thing we do is we stare down at our phone. God forbid we make eye contact with somebody else in the elevator.
Right.
And it's become such a, comfort that you don't have to worry about introducing yourself to new people or have any sort of feeling of, discomfort.
Exactly. Well, I just taught a class of like 150 students. And when I get in there, no one talks to each other before class. Like, no one. Everyone's on their phone. I remember when I was in college, we didn't have, like, all the social stuff on our phones yet. So it was like, you just sit there and, like, just catch up with random people. You know, you'd meet new people. You'd, like, expand your friend group just sitting and waiting for the professor to show up to class and get all his or her stuff ready to teach, you know? And that's, like, totally gone now. So I might start a ban of, like, no cell phones before class. You're forced to ask the person next to you a question.
I'm sure that'll be popular with college age kids.
Oh, they'll all have panic attacks and faint.
Well, thank you again for coming on. I appreciate your time. Where's the best place that people can find you and find out more about your new book as it comes out, or even order your existing book? Yeah,
so the existing book, The Comfort Crisis, is available everywhere books are sold. I know a lot of people get it on Audible. People like the audio. I do read it, which is, I don't know if that's good or bad. Depends on if you think my voice is annoying. And then I got a website, Easter Michael, and I got a newsletter that I send out stuff. And then I'm on Instagram at Michael_Easter.
Well, thank you. I thoroughly enjoyed it. And I highly encourage everybody listening to pick up the book. You will not be disappointed. And if you guys have any questions or suggestions for the show, be sure and let us know at podcast@volquartson.com. As always, thank you for listening.